you. It's great. All right. Well, I wanted to announce our speaker now. Excited to hear about what his topic will be, and it's our speaker, Tim Adams. Captain Tim Adams is a former airline captain, has held leadership and executive positions at United Airlines and the Boeing Company. Adam has a unique perspective and expertise in the application of the disciplines and principles of crew resource management and threat and error management in safety-critical environments and performance-driven cultures. Please give Adam a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking about how to deploy your leadership radar in your workplace or in team dynamics, in organizations that you may be involved in. And so throughout the day here, would like you to be thinking about your workplace, the organizations that you're involved with, and see how this might apply to you. As you look at this screen in the lower right is actually the enhanced ground proximity warning system and weather radar that's overlaid on this screen for pilots to look at. See that big red circle there? That's actually Mount Rainier out there just off to my left. This is in a flight simulator, a full flight simulator, so it's not actually in the airplane, but gives you an idea of that level of situational awareness that flight crews have available to them, because many times your vision is obscured. You're in the clouds, you can't see outside, and so many times your leadership vision might be obscured at times. And so if you have your leadership radar available to you, you'll be able to navigate safely through the problems that may arise in your workplace. So where were you on September 11th, 2001? I think most of us have a clear vision. We go right back to that just over 12 years ago as to where you were when you heard the news, when you saw the sights of what was going on in New York and Washington, D.C. that day. I was a captain with United Airlines, and I held the position of Director of Flight Training Center Operations, running all flight training for United Airlines in Denver, and led 1,400 employees there at that facility. And that morning, driving to work, pager went off. Remember when we all had pagers, those types of things? Pager went off and it said, airplane hits WTC, flight 175 and flight 93 missing. What does that mean? And certainly became very clear and evident as to what was going on just a few minutes later. But the events of that day forever changed my personal and professional life. I'd never had a life event, what you would consider a life event, happen at work before until that day. Captain Jason Dahl, who is in command of Flight 93 that went down in Pennsylvania, was a personal friend of mine and a colleague and an employee of mine. And I was actually in his living room 3 days earlier, and we were discussing which of us was going to fly that trip. It was an open trip that management pilots would try to pick up and help the scheduling desk, and so we were discussing which of us was going to fly that. And then, of course, when found out what had happened, it became my responsibility to go to his home and tell his wife and son that he was not coming home. And I was the liaison to the family to ensure that they were well taken care of in the weeks and months that followed. And just a few weeks after this event, almost 12 years ago to today, was at Jason's funeral, and his mother Mildred came up to me, grabbed me by both hands, pulled me close and looked me straight in the eye and said, my son loved United Airlines. He gave his life in service to it. You do whatever you have to do and whatever you can do in your position to ensure that this airline does not fail. If United Airlines fails, the terrorists win. Don't let that happen. Pretty powerful words. And went back to work the next day and shared that message with my employees and with my colleagues. And it really was a powerful message that we took forward. And all of us as leaders throughout our organization had to summon every bit of courage, every bit of leadership that we have learned, the principles and disciplines of crew resource management, threat and error management, that I'll mention some of that today, to try to ensure that we didn't make a terrible situation even worse. We had to be aware of our surroundings. Our situational awareness had to be very sharp and understand what the threats were and what was out there. So the airline was thrust into a crisis. All airline operations stopped for 3 days, was shut down. When things resumed, we had 26% of our revenues were gone instantly. Not too many businesses can sustain that, if at all, for very long. So we had a financial, a public, and a personal crisis for all of us to overcome. Our employees had the whole range of emotions: fear, anger, what's going to happen, the airline's still going to be around. So we were wondering, whether the very existence of the airline was in doubt or not. So leaders and pilots, we have to identify risk and mitigate that risk before it escalates into another crisis. So in other words, leaders need to deploy their leadership radar, is the term I'm using threat and error management system that I'll describe today. So threat and error management had its origins in the airline industry. Back in about 1996 is when it came about. And the objectives were to identify potential threats and errors in and around the workplace, to implement steps to solve the threats before they happen, and then develop a situational awareness as I described. So if you look at this globe, from the bottom up, you want to have that threat situational awareness, manage those threats, which I'll discuss shortly. Then you have to make decisions on that, and someone has to be in command. Someone has to be that ultimate leader that's going to make those final decisions as to how you're going to manage and make those decisions. There's 5 keys to threat and error management. Following established procedures. When you're in a safety critical culture, and when I say that, it's places like the cockpit, the operating room, nuclear power, military. It's where if you make a bad enough mistake or allow a chain of events to happen, loss of human life will, not may, will occur. So it's a really safety critical. You have to do things correctly and make sure you do them in a disciplined way and proper order many times. So having those established procedures to follow. And you can also apply this, like I said, in your workplace where you don't want to make a mistake. Could be a big problem for your community, for your business, health and success, your own personal issues, but it can apply there as well. Use of proper and consistent phraseology. Make sure everybody's calling whatever piece of equipment you're using, whatever procedure you're using, that they're all referring to it in the same way so there's clear communication. Continuously monitor the activity. Not that you're paranoid all the time, but you have to monitor and be aware of what's going on around you with your people and what you're doing yourself. Clarify and challenge when you see things that are inconsistent, and make errors visible. You don't hide them under the table. You don't, oh, that was a really bad mistake. Don't tell anybody. You might get in trouble for that. You have to, I don't want to necessarily say embrace when you make a mistake, but you have to get it out there in the open and let people know about it. Share that this happened to you or to your team, and how can we prevent that from happening to others, and how can we prevent that from happening to us again. This is not threat and error management. This is the old days, back in the 60s and 70s in aviation. Basically, the captain was the pilot. Many people still think there's just one pilot up there, but there aren't. It's a multi-crew situation. But yes, basically, don't touch anything. Did I ask you a question? I don't think so. If I want to hear from you, I'll ask. That kind of attitude. Not that way in aviation anymore, but it certainly is still out there in the business world. Some operating rooms are still that way, sad to say, but in healthcare it's still evolving. But this is not a quick fix to improve safety. It's not a standalone system. It has to be incorporated into all of what you do. And it's not a passive series of classroom lectures. I can't stand in front of a group of people for an hour and a half, give them a lecture and say, okay, now you're trained, you know how to do this. It's a continuous process. You have to be recurrent training, get back at it again, discuss it, and talk about these things. It's not a psychological or personality assessment tool to get in your head, and it's not a way to try to change behavior from management. It's something you have to be thinking about yourself. So threat and error management uses all available resources, not only in the room where you are, but places that you don't even think about. Outside your sphere of awareness, it's using those resources. Maybe it's a phone call away to get knowledge from somebody. or someone knows someone who they can bring in to help solve the problem. Promotes a non-punitive culture, where, like I said before, if you tell on yourself or say, I made this huge mistake, you're not gonna get fired for it. You shouldn't be reprimanded, shouldn't be disciplined. People there should be an empowered culture, and it's up to the leader to do that. To create an environment where if you have 30 years or 30 days of experience, the person with 30 days feels empowered to speak up if they see something wrong. They may be the only one with the solution in the room. So you have to create an environment where they feel empowered to do so. This centers on clear, comprehensive procedures. See this out the window. What would you do? Now hopefully the flight crew has had their radar on and saw this long before you would get this close to it.
What is it?
That's a thunderstorm. It's a big one. Equatorial regions of Brazil. They build them big down there, like 70 or 80,000 feet high, twice as high as you'd ever see any thunderstorm around this area. And there's enough power in that thing to power a city for years. But you don't want to get close to something like that, and you have your weather radar on, your situational awareness, so that you see it even over the horizon, over 100 miles away, so you can change your plan, divert, move around it. Hopefully they're not aiming at that. Hopefully that's out the side window or something that they're trying to avoid. But you don't want a last minute crisis to blow up if you could have avoided it by having your radar on. So there are countermeasures that you can use. Like I said, standard operating procedures, SOPs, we talk about it in the airline industry. If you know any of us as pilots, we're very anal retentive people. We've got to do things in a certain order. I put my keys over here on this table and I already know where all my stuff is. And you follow a certain procedure and order of things. Drives some people nuts, but it works. Checklist discipline, checklist discipline, following the checklist. If it's a safety critical or critical to the success of your business, you want to do things in a certain order. And the team situational awareness. Everybody on the team has to be aware of what's going on and question it when it isn't. Quality briefings. If it's a real critical operation, something you're going to be doing, talk about it ahead of time. Okay, folks, this is your assignment. I'm going to be doing this. We're removing this kidney today, or whatever it might be. And everybody knows what their jobs are going to be. Then afterwards, you do a post briefing. It only takes a few seconds to just talk about what went well. What opportunities do we have to do it better next time? So here's the definition of a threat. This is the Civil Aviation Authority definition. You can read that for yourself. Basically, it's something that is outside of the influence of your team that can increase the complexity, make things a little bit tougher for you. So a threat is not an error. A threat is a red flag. It's a warning. Kind of like you see that thunderstorm out there. Your weather radar says something big out there. You don't want to go that direction. There's 6 categories of threats that I think you can apply to your areas of work. Environmental threats, that might be weather's bad. Could be you have a major construction project going on in the wing of the building, or something that's just affecting the environment that you normally work in. Organizational threats, maybe there's a reorganization going on. A whole new board of directors or a new leader to your organization, and they may have a different way of doing things. That can be a threat to you. Expected threats, you know that there's regulatory changes coming around, or an unexpected threat shows up. Latent threats are things like, this person really wasn't trained, didn't have the education that they said they had, they're really not trained to operate this equipment. And then user error threats, same type of thing, where a threat that somebody doesn't know how to do the job that they've been assigned to do, or the task that they're going to be doing. So unrecognized or mismanaged threats generate errors. So what is an error? May seem pretty simple, but it's either an action or not doing something that leads to a different outcome than you were expecting. In other words, it's a mistake. Pretty simple. So there's different types of errors. Procedural errors, not following those standard operating procedures that you had laid out. This is the way you're supposed to do it, folks. This is what I expect in this order, and you didn't follow that. Handling errors. Maybe they entered something wrong into the computer, or didn't operate the equipment, didn't follow the directions, or whatever they were supposed to do with this machine, did it in the wrong order, and the machine ended up doing something wrong. Then the all-important communication errors. I think we can all relate to some of these. There's several. The miscommunication, just not understanding what the person was saying, might be a language barrier, could be a number of different things, cultural issues. Misinterpretation, I thought you meant this. I heard what you said, but I thought this is what you meant. Incomplete briefings, not being thorough enough with what you briefed the team on, what you were going to be doing. Non-standard phraseology, a killer in aviation. I thought you meant this switch. The big red one, don't touch that one, or whatever it might be. And non-standard phraseology, I wanted you to turn on that gizmo over there. Well, what is, no. Oh, you mean the left hydraulic system switch? That kind of thing. So you got to be specific many times. And of course, incorrect information being passed. You just were flat out wrong when you told the person what you wanted them to do. You ever heard any of these phrases around your workplace? No problem, we can do that. I got it covered. No, don't worry about that. What's it doing? They say in the cockpit the things you don't want to hear is when your flight engineer says, well, according to my experience, it's the most junior person. Or when the first officer says, Captain, I've been thinking. Or when the captain says, watch this. Look out, not a good thing to hear. But there are some highlighted words here in red, safe, concerned, and uncomfortable. In aviation and even in healthcare now, you'll start to hear what's known as cuss words. The concerned, uncomfortable, safe, or safety. If you hear those words from one of your colleagues or your employees or your team members, whoa, what's going on? I'm uncomfortable, Captain, or what? They can't stop an airplane in mid-flight when you're 600 miles an hour, but you can, unless you're on final approach, you have a moment to pause and just say, what's going on? What are you uncomfortable about? You don't like driving toward that thunderstorm? Or whatever it might be. Or, I'm concerned, flight attendant calls up, says, Captain, I'm concerned about an issue back here. Well, what is it? And so you kind of train yourself to use those words when you really want to convey something's definitely wrong here, I need your attention. And of course, safety is critical in aviation, healthcare, and maybe even in businesses that you own and operate. So what is error management? How do we work around this? It's a process for detecting and responding to the errors with countermeasures that mitigate the probability, or if it happens, the severity of even more errors happening or undesired states. So we're never going to eliminate errors, but you can certainly manage and possibly mitigate them so that they don't happen. It's a plan. You ever known a pilot doesn't have a plan, the flight plan? We get very uncomfortable when we have to divert off the flight plan and land somewhere other than where our passengers want to be. And so we go through our lives, anything I take on, any new project, I gotta have a plan, I gotta know where I'm heading, and it's an uncomfortable feeling for me not to know or have that plan in place. So we can't prevent all errors, nor can we avoid them, but we can certainly manage them. So does all this really work? How many of you remember the landing on the Hudson, Flight 1549, US Airways, Captain Sullenberger? Never happened before. Have to land on a river like that. And everybody survived. Captain Sullenberger, I knew prior to that accident, and he was the air safety chairman for US Airways for their pilots association, for the pilots union. So he lived and breathed crew resource management, threat and error management. He preached it, he taught it. He was a check airman, taught new captains, taught new first officers, as I was. That's where I met him, was at a conference talking about these kinds of things. And so it was you talked to him afterwards, and this was a natural thing for him to do. He'd never experienced something like that, having the probability of losing thrust in both engines over a huge metropolitan area with 10 million people below you. They quickly assessed the risk and used these principles. You don't know you're doing it. Once you're trained on this and it becomes part of your culture and your mindset, you don't even think about, oh, I have to use threat and error management here now. No, it just kicks in, it's automatic. And that's what they were doing. And if you talk to him afterwards, he doesn't see himself as a hero. It's like, I did my job the way I was trained. We went through the checklist. We tried to restore thrust all the time, using my resource management outside the flight deck, talking to controllers. Okay, What airport's closest to me? Okay, I can't go back to LaGuardia. How about Teterboro, New Jersey over here? Nope, that's not gonna work. And he's first officer. You listen to the cockpit voice recording, these guys were just doing it perfectly. And so this does work. And they had a successful conclusion, obviously. So I'm here to say, yes, this does work. Deploying your leadership radar works in a crisis. And more importantly, it can prevent a crisis. Your definition of crisis might be a little bit different depending on where you work and what you do, but it can certainly prevent you from getting to that very uncomfortable place. So for a leader, and I would submit that all of you are leaders, even if you're not the designated boss of your organization or your company or business, anyone can be a leader, can exhibit these and use these disciplines and principles in their day-to-day lives. So I'm a leadership junkie in that way. But it can work in any safety critical environment or any environment where you want to improve your efficiencies and productivity, and you want that to be enhanced. So you are the leader. And my question is your leadership radar on? I hope it is, or will be in the future, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Tim?
Yes?
This would make an excellent training video. If you would make, I'm sure there would be a great learning.
You need the one to do a video for me right now?
Well, thank you.
No, I think it would, a lot of companies would love that.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a leadership junkie. It's something that's been very important to me for many years. Leading an organization of 1,400 employees at United that was centered all around safety and training of pilots and flight attendants in their job.
So the plane the other day that landed in Boise was a pilot had a heart attack. So the co-pilot could land the plane by himself without any problem?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one problem. The media, always refers to the pilot.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? There's at least two up there. And they're both qualified to fly the airplane. In fact, they do every other leg, whether you know it or not. There's always, the captain's always in command and will take the ultimate responsibility for how things go well or not. They always blame him or her for the bad landing or the good landing. They always give him credit, but the truth is, the captain flies one leg segment, the next leg, the first officer is the pilot flying, and the other one is the pilot monitoring. We use that term.
So unless they're both asleep, like the other day when the two of them supposedly were both asleep, and then they wake up and say, gee, we're past the course here.
Yeah, I've heard that has happened once or twice somewhere in the world, but yeah, so the pilots are fully qualified to fly the airplane. I actually had it happen to me one time on a transcon flight from Philadelphia to Los Angeles when I was a first officer, and my captain ate something that he had a bad allergic reaction to and was basically incapacitated with food poisoning. And it happened over northern Arizona on the way into Los Angeles, and we were near top of descent, and so I had the flight attendants pull him out of the seat and get him on the floor and helping him out. And meanwhile, I had no other pilots, nobody, crew members, fellow employees, anybody on the airplane. 200 people, had no one to help me, but was able to, got a lot of automation to help you out too, and lessen the burden, the workload, but was able to land safely, of course. Got up to the hospital, he survived. Yes?
Does this leadership training extend to flight crews, such as the flight attendants, since sometimes you have these kinds of threats in air, flight attendants have a lot of
Yes. Crew resource management had its origins in the early 80s, and at first it was just for pilots, for the flight crews. But now it has expanded to flight attendants and also to the maintenance personnel, because they're performing critical safety functions. Their tolerances on engine fan blades and things like that are so critical that they'd be very precise. They have very precise procedures that they have to follow, and so it's certainly a safety critical. And the relationship of what you have between pilots, mechanics, and flight attendants is very important, so yes, it's used throughout the industry now.
And the other question was the 9/11 tragedy. Of course, we saw a lot of immediate kinds of changes, press, Brandeis, being forced to cockpit, did this, did that. but what kind of leadership did United Airlines or the airline industry exert over other organizations, other entities, such as the TSA, where we found that there was a weak spot in our security in terms of passengers?
Yeah, there was a lot of influence. You know, the airlines, the Department of Homeland Security did not exist until after 9/11. So that was born from all of what we learned, and you know, we had a whole different way of thinking about things. I mean, when you thought of it, that cockpit door is a half-inch of plywood with a little metal clip on it. That's all that's keeping people out. One swift kick, and you're through it. It wasn't really protecting us from anything, but then we didn't think that we needed to be protected from anything like that. It changed our world. Now it's bulletproof Kevlar, triple dead bolts with key codes, and anytime that you want to leave the flight deck to go take care of physiological issues, you have to have flight attendants guarding the door, or barriers that they put across and things like that, putting carts out in the aisle. So it's a different environment than it ever was before. But yeah, it took a lot of collaboration, the airlines working with organizations in Washington to develop new processes, new procedures, a lot of things behind the scenes that you've never even heard about are going on with all the screening of luggage and how tickets are booked and all those types of things. So there's a lot of scrutiny going on that the general public still is not aware of that happens. Yes.
Using your presentation here about radar and identifying problems, relate that to how, to use the famous word, the dots were not connected in the first place. And secondly, how come the doors weren't reinforced before they went up instead of after? Was this not in place at this time, this training session?
Well, the crew resource management and threat and error management certainly was in place. You know, like I said, crew resource management for 30 years, since the early 80s. Threat and error management was added to that as a component of the overall training and leadership training for flight crews in the mid-90s. So it was in place. So we had our act together, if you will, of how we were going to be interacting as crew members and improving safety. That was, you know, the team dynamic, the collaboration, and crew coordination to make things safer and more efficient, and that has proven to work time and time again. But the threats, it just wasn't on our radar. It hadn't happened in the world to think that someone was going to storm the cockpit, kill the pilots, and fly it into national monuments and buildings, and the World Trade Center and all. There's a complete paradigm shift for us in aviation, and now, you know, talk about having the radar on now and being very cognizant of what can and could happen out there, things that we even didn't imagine. Now we're trying to imagine what might happen and try to mitigate those risks long before you ever see them. Yes?
I can remember, as a James, you're old enough to remember, when I was a kid, I can remember flying with the DC-3, and they let us a kid go up into the cockpit and sit there and watch fly.
I remember that when I was working in business.
We were-
You can still go.
We weren't worried about threats.
Showed up 3 minutes before the
Yeah.
plane took off and got on. Not anymore.
Hey Tim, I'm just curious, what are you currently doing? Do you still, what's on your radar?
I had to unfortunately medically retire as an airline captain due to medical issues back in, well, shortly after 9/11, actually. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and had to medically retire, so I could no longer fly professionally, but maintained executive positions, had to leave. I had to retire from my position at United because the person in charge of all flight training, they wanted to be an active pilot. You'll be out there and practice what you preach and interact with the crews, and I certainly agree with that philosophy. So I had to step away from my dream job, but was able to find a position here in Seattle as an executive with Boeing doing similar training leadership activities. I did resign from that position a couple of years ago, and am now in a transition looking for my next leadership opportunity. But I've gained a lot of transferable skills in my years in aviation, a lot of leadership skills, and like I said, these disciplines of threat and error management, crew resource management, work in any type of business environment. I love people, love working around people, improving performance, improving productivity, improving efficiency, and anywhere that I can land now to bring value to an organization. Yeah, well, you know, I tell people I'm in a holding pattern right now looking for an alternate landing site. But I want it to be a safe landing site and someplace where I can bring more to the organization than I get from them. That's where I'm happiest, is when I can make a difference for people. And so that's what I'm looking for now. It's been a very interesting ride over the last year or so, with the networking and meeting some wonderful people coming to organizations like this. So thanks for asking.
More questions?
I have one question.
Yes.
With more airplanes flying around the world right now, could you comment on Asian Airlines crashes? Nature Airlines.
Yeah, Asiana, I want to be careful that I don't proclaim what the probable cause was, because the media, I don't know what business some of you are in, but if the media or a television show happens to portray what it is you do, it just makes you cringe when you hear them professing what happened, or see a medical show of your doctor. It would just drive you nuts. But it was very clear to me, and actually I know one of the crew members that was in a United Airlines 747 that was sitting short of the runway waiting for takeoff when this airplane was approaching the runway. And they had a front row seat. They saw the whole thing. And it was pretty clear when I saw the wreckage and I saw what had happened that the airplane had obviously hit the seawall, and I'll tell you this much, I'm sure that the airplane was in perfect operating order. There was nothing wrong with the airplane. But it'll all come out in the investigation. We'll know the probable cause, and it's going to take several months. It always does to ensure they do this right, to honor everybody involved, the victims, the crews, the crew members, and have to do a proper investigation. But I do know from being involved in training Korean crews, for example, you got 3,000 years of culture there, where it's an environment where you don't want to allow someone, a senior person, to lose face or to embarrass somebody. And so you may not speak out immediately when you see an error or see a mistake that might embarrass somebody. This was a training flight, actually. It was a seasoned veteran captain, but new to that particular airplane type. So you had a captain check airman instructor sitting in the co-pilot seat that should know something was going wrong as well. And you had a third pilot, because it's a long international flight, you had an augmented crew member sitting there watching all of this. And the airspeed, we have a rule in the airlines that if your airspeed is more than 5 knots slow of your target speed, you speak up, call it out. They were 35 knots below. And the throttles were sitting there at idle. Nobody was watching the store. No one had any situational awareness of what was going on around them. Beautiful, clear, visual day in San Francisco. It's a day that I was always praying for. It's like, just let me do a visual approach without any of all this other restrictions, and just flying on a beautiful day and fly the airplane like I was trained to do since my first days in assessment. So a lot of breakdowns in communication, standard operating procedures, if they had them, they weren't followed. So a lot of those things are pretty clear, but we'll all find out together when they have the actual probable cause. But lack of threat and error management skills, lack of crew resource management skills, or at least they didn't display, or if they've been trained on it, because not all cultures around the world receive this training. They're not even welcome in some countries. They don't even like talking about this kind of stuff. It's kind of like that red sign you saw before, the captain's God, and don't question, did I ask you something? I don't think so. And so we'll all find out together. It was a tragedy for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you very
Thank you, everybody.
So Tim, in your honor, we'll be donating 300 pounds to Rotary First Harvest. And so thank you for being here. And we're going to tell you how much we raised today with you as a speaker.
So far, I've received $73.
Excellent, thank you. Is there?
No, I haven't, he already paid you. He pays up.
And in addition, if you are choosing to land somewhere with the Rotary Club, we'd love to have you come back and visit us, being a member. So